This video is brought to you in collaboration with Dash Vapes Canada. If you're a vapor, you may have heard of the term rebuilding or building coils. This refers to the act of building the coil that goes into your device rather than buying replacements. Looking at building coils from an outside perspective may seem intimidating, but in reality it's quite easy and fun to do. The coils that you build for a vape are no different than the coils that you are currently using in your devices. Now, before we go into the actual tutorial of building and installing a coil, let's first go over the benefits of building and why you should consider it. There are 5 fundamental reasons as to why building your coils is recommended. First is cost. The cost of supplies for coils is minuscule in comparison to buying pre-built coil heads. For the same amount as a pack of coils, you can have enough supplies to last close to a year depending on how often you change your coils. 2 is longevity. Really, the only part that burns out in a coil is the cotton within it. The actual coil itself is still fine when a coil tastes burnt. When you build your own coils, you have the ability to change out the cotton, otherwise known as re-wicking. This not only saves supplies, but is essentially just as easy as changing out a normal coil head. Third is you are able to get a vape experience that suits you. These pre-built coil heads for tanks only really perform one way and one way only. With a rebuildable, you can build a coil for more flavor, more vapor, or both. And that perfectly leads into the next reason as to why you should build coils, and that's endless possibilities. Again, you can make literally any type of coil you prefer, whether it's a simple single coil or a super complex Clapton, you have that choice. And lastly, it's just fun. Building coils is a hobby to many people, including myself. It's fun being able to tinker with your vape, fine-tuning it into one that's perfect for you. Okay, so now that we know some reasons as to why you should build your own coils, let's talk about actually making and installing them. Now, before we install any coils, we're going to need some supplies. First, you're going to need an atomizer that utilizes rebuildable coils. This build tutorial will be demonstrated on a K-Fun Lite, as it is one of the best options for beginners in terms of build quality, usability, and flavor. You're also going to need some resistance wire of your choice. There are many different types of wires out there, which can get confusing. If you're just starting out, we recommend going with a Kanthal wire as it's the easiest to work with. Today, we will be using 26 gauge Kanthal wire. You will also need some cotton. Cotton bacon is a fan favorite in the vaping industry. And lastly, some tools like a pair of wire cutters, scissors, ceramic tweezers, and mini screwdrivers. Now, if you don't have these tools at home, Coilmaster offers a variety of kits that includes everything you need. Okay, now that we have the tools that we need, let's prepare the atomizer. You may find it quite annoying with the atomizer rolling around like so, which is why we recommend attaching it to a device. Just make sure that the batteries are removed to avoid accidental firing. Remove the tank section or top cap from your atomizer to reveal the build deck. You will notice some small screws inside the build deck. These are your terminal clamps that will be holding down your coil, but we don't need to worry about that just yet. Just back out the screws a bit so we can fit coils underneath them. Next, grab your resistance wire and cut about 10 centimeters worth of wire. In the Coilmaster toolkit, you will also find some steel rods with different diameters. This is what we're going to be wrapping our coil around. Now, we recommend starting with 2.5mm as it makes for a good starting point. Grab the 2.5mm rod and the wire you just cut. Hold one end of the wire and the rod with one hand and begin wrapping with the other, leaving even space between each wrap. For this coil, we're going to make a total of 7 wraps with the wire ending in opposite directions. Important note here is that some atomizers will require the wire to face in the same direction, for example something like this, but for K-Funs or similar build decks, they must go in opposite directions. Also, if the wire that your thumb and finger were holding turns out a little crooked, you can undo a wrap to clean things up a bit. Your coil should now look something like this. While the coil is still on the rod, we are now going to install it into the atomizer. Take your coil and fit the leads in between the lead screws that we took out before. Your coil should drop right into place. Center the coil with the atomizer and use your thumb and index fingers to wrap the coil ends to the opposite side of the posts, like so. You can use your thumb and index finger to hold the coil in place as you tighten it down, just to avoid the coil from moving around. Once you tighten down the screws, you may notice that the coil itself looks a little crooked between the two posts. You can now use the rod to straighten up the coil so it sits in between the posts perfectly. We find twisting the coil while lifting it up away from the airflow hole will also straighten out your coil. You now want to snip the wire leads facing inward so they do not protrude beyond the build deck. And now we can test the coil. Remove the coil rod from the coil and attach it to a device with batteries. Set the wattage of the device very low, for example 12 watts, and start firing the device. A big warning is to not touch the coil as it will be extremely hot. Once you hold down the fire button for 2 to 3 seconds, you should see the coil start glowing red from the inside out. If your coil isn't glowing evenly or if it's a little messy, you can use the ceramic tweezers to gently squeeze the coil together. If you're still experiencing hot spots or uneven glow, take the tweezers and gently brush across the coil until the hot spots go away and the coil evenly heats up. Once your coil is heating up evenly, we're ready for the last step, and that's installing the cotton wick. One very important note for this part is to not fire the coil while the dry cotton is inside the coil. Grab a strand of cotton from the bag about this size. Twist one end of the cotton with your fingers to form a pointy tip. Guide the pointy tip through the coil and pull through. It's normal if you feel a little resistance, but if it starts tugging the coil along with it, pull the cotton back out, remove some fibers, and try again. Again, the cotton should just slide through the coil with a slight amount of resistance, but not to the point where the coil is starting to get warped. This is going to require a bit of trial and error on your first few attempts, but after a few re-wicks, you'll be a wicking pro. Now you can trim the excess cotton, leaving 1 to 2 centimeters on each side, and you should have something that looks like this. Now simply take your tweezers and gently tuck the cotton into the pockets in the build deck. Try not to stuff the deck with cotton or you'll run into dry hits, just gently tuck them. Again, this will take some trial and error, but after a few attempts it gets much easier. Once tucked, the cotton should sit within the pockets with some fluff to them. Avoid crimping the cotton as that will affect the wicking performance. Now drip a couple drops of e-liquid right onto the coil so the cotton can absorb it. Now put everything back together, fill up your tank, and congratulations, you just installed your very first coil. Now that you have the basics down, you can start experimenting with different diameters, different number of wraps, and different wire gauges, all of which will affect the vape performance differently. Now the first few coils that you make may not be the prettiest, but with practice they will look and perform better and better. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us.